Hi, good evening. Thanks for joining us on the MSJ Live podcast. My name is Bob Schroeder. I'm an orthopedic physical therapist here at Monterey Spine and Joint. And I'm happy to be talking about today's topic, which is how to age gracefully. We're going to be talking about different aspects of health and how you can implement those aspects of health in the easiest way possible. And I'm going to let my co-host introduce herself.
My name is Anya Bob, and I'm a PTA here at MSJ. Bob and I had this idea for the topic, and we wanted to talk about how to make exercise recommendations a little more accessible and a little less obtuse. We want to clear everything up. So, when you're thinking about your questions, think about where you are right now, where you want to be, or maybe this presentation will kind of give you some more clarity about where you want to be.
Great, thank you. So let's actually dive in right away. When we're looking at health in general, as an orthopedic physical therapist, I know that I only have a certain amount of control over different aspects of health, but I have to take into account the entire profile of what a person can do for themselves outside of the clinic as well. So helping to educate them as to the different pillars of health is really how we're probably going to frame this conversation today. So we'll talk about aspects of nutrition, aspects of sleep, aspects of stress management, and certainly aspects of exercise and movement. And that's really where we're going to focus most of our attention because that is our expertise. So with that being said, Anya, would you like to start us off maybe just in thinking about what motivates you and your patients and why do you have such a really instinctive drive to get people to move more and to move better? If you can give us a little bit of your story for that, that'd be awesome.
Well, I originally started out as a personal trainer, and I loved helping people exercise. But at some point, I kind of didn't really know why I was giving people the advice that I was giving them, and I felt like I didn't really have all the best tools to help them get as fit as they wanted to be, which is why I ended up going back to school to learn more about physical therapy. Exercise in general is some of the best things that we can do for our health. Our bodies are really made to move, and they're not particularly fragile either. They're pretty robust and they're pretty adaptable. And sometimes I find that because exercise is such a big part of health, sometimes the healthiest thing that you can do for one of your patients is to get them stronger, better cardio, more robust body. And so I end up pushing a lot of really active exercise interventions for my patients because I figure that's going to give them the most bang for their buck. Obviously not everyone can tolerate the same amount right at the beginning, and you have to start at the level that someone's at. But yeah, it's huge for me to be able to help people increase their activity level, increase their activity ceiling, so that pushing them here in the clinic, they're probably doing harder things than they ever would have to do in their home lives. It gives them a higher ceiling of activity to work within so that when they're home, they're not pushing up against the ceiling that they had due to their inability to do movement. What about you?
Well, you said a lot of really good things in that. I think meeting the person where they are, wherever they are in their movement background is important. And one of the things that I really like about the team here at MSJ is we do try to implement an active approach to rehabilitation. There's certainly a lot of aspects of things that we can do passively, but we really try to transition folks into a mindset of capacity building. And I think, especially in seeing how you practice, it really motivates me as a therapist to want to do more of that as well. And this whole thing about ceiling and floor is interesting because I think nowadays we are running into the problem where people are just not moving enough. They think that their ceiling is as much as they can get, but that's really the floor of what we see that they can do. So I want to maybe take that as a segue into talking about some of the things that from a global perspective, we're dealing with in terms of the general population not moving enough, and what are the consequences of not moving enough. So looking at the World Health Organization, who tabulates a lot of statistics over physical activity, we can see that 1 in 4 adults really just aren't meeting the recommendations of the levels of physical activity that are required. And we can see that on a daily basis having impact, especially in this country, on metabolic diseases, obesity, diabetes, cardiovascular disease. And so if we can just make a small dent in that by instilling a little bit of inspiration and a little bit of perspiration to try and meet a higher standard of movement, then I think we're doing our part. Why don't you help us understand, Anya, about what else the World Health Organization wants people in general to do in terms of minimums for movement?
Yeah, sure. So what they suggest is that the minimums for movement are, they suggest 150 minutes of moderate activity or 75 minutes of vigorous activity, or a combination of both. And this can be a little bit confusing because you're kind of thinking, well, what is moderate activity? You know, I go for walks or I do my gardening. Like, what exactly is, what do they mean by moderate? And when it comes to exercise intensity, they've actually come up with a scale called METS, M-E-T. And this scale, it lists different examples for light, moderate, and vigorous activity. And the scale, I think it goes up, what, to 20? So light would be considered 0 to 3, and that would be things like walking slowly, sitting using the computer, standing, doing some light work like cooking or washing dishes, playing an instrument. Whereas moderate would be like taking a brisk walk, and that would be 3 to 6 METs. Brisk walk, heavy cleaning, such as vacuuming or washing windows, mowing the lawn, a light effort bicycling, you know, tennis doubles. And then vigorous would be anything over 6 METs. So hiking, jogging at 6 miles an hour, shoveling, carrying heavy loads, bicycling fast, basketball game, you know, things that really ratchet up your heart rate. And so hopefully that gives you a little bit more clarity on what they mean by moderate and vigorous. And so that number can be split over any number of sessions. So if you wanted to just do moderate activity, you could do 30 minutes 5 times a week. You could do vigorous for 25 minutes 3 times a week, or you could kind of do some combination of both.
And just to clarify, a MET is a metabolic equivalent of a task. So if you're just sitting in a relaxed way, that's a metabolic equivalent, or a MET of 1. So all of the numbers that Anya described are relative to that reference, that baseline. So if you think about patients, what are some of the things that we tend to do to get people to understand, what does that feel like to do something moderate? What does that feel like to do something vigorous? Do we worry about their heart rate? Do we worry about their breathing rate? Do we worry about them being able to talk while they walk? You know, any of these ways to measure how much exertion you're putting out into an activity can be used throughout the entire course of your movement profile. So if you end up doing training for a 5K or a marathon, you can always go back to understanding relative to these early stages of what feels like exertion in your body. That will always translate to later on when you're trying to compare, well, how much energy am I putting into this other activity now that I am more fully trained? So hopefully, you know, hopefully you understand that the WHO guidelines just give us a framework, but we really want to do more than just the base minimum of the 150 minutes or the 75. So before we delve too much into the physical activity stuff, let's touch upon the nutrition side of things and then the sleep and the stress management, just to give an overall idea of what other things we can work on regarding health. So what about we start with nutrition, and what do we need to know about nutrition and maybe protein intake for folks?
Protein intake is something that I think people probably get tired of hearing about because people like us kind of bang on about it. But there's a reason that we talk about it. And I think it's because it's very easy to undereat protein. If you're not focusing on it, it's very easy to do. Also, the RDA, the daily recommendations that the FDA currently has are a little bit low, definitely for the average person, but also for older adults as well. So let me just throw out some numbers right now. It's very annoying to calculate, but what they're currently recommending is 0.8 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. So that's the one that I think is pretty low. Experts in the field of protein and aging recommend a protein intake between 1.2 and 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. So because that is so annoying to calculate, I did a couple of calculations so that a 120-pound person, the bare minimum of protein would be 65 grams per day. A 150-pound person would be 81 grams per day, and a 200-pound person would be 108 grams per day. Things can start to get a little bit hairy if you get more body weight than that, because someone who's 300 pounds is probably not going to be wanting to eat as much protein as you plug into that equation. However, if you kind of choose what is a relatively normal body weight for your height, you can do that formula and get a pretty decent number. And so just to get it in perspective a little bit, protein intakes throughout the day, you want to be eating 20 to 30 grams at every meal. So like for breakfast, 2 eggs have about 12 grams of protein. So that doesn't quite cut it. A cup of yogurt has about 15 to, Greek yogurt, the high protein kind, has about 15 to 20. A small chicken breast probably has about 20 to 25. So it's, as long as you're eating, good quality sources of protein, such as dairy, meat, legumes, things like that, it's not that hard to do. But if you're not focusing on it, it's really easy to undereat protein.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and I think it's underestimated how important the nutrition aspect is for weight management. So a lot of times when we're seeing patients and they have orthopedic problems, anything that they're trying to recover from is always going to be made a little bit more challenging if they're carrying on extra body weight. And we can give them all the best exercises in the world, but if we don't have them at least start to understand what they can do proactively from a nutrition standpoint, then we're not going to get the optimal outcome that we're shooting for. And usually most people, I think, understand when they feel like they're not 100%, they do want to do something nutritionally different, but they just don't know what to do. And certainly registered dietitians are the go-to professionals for all of this. So, it's great to have the ability to call on, let's say, a sports registered dietitian to work with somebody, an athlete that's maybe trying to get back into shape, or even just somebody who, has never logged their own foods during the week, just to understand, well, how many grams of protein am I getting per day? I mean, I have no clue, regardless of not even knowing what the minimums are. I just don't even know what I'm putting in my body. So nutrition is huge, I think, for me, as something that you can start to develop good habits along with the movement habits that we're trying to promote in the clinic.
I do also want to say something about recovering from a surgery or maybe a pretty big injury, something that where your body's doing a lot of healing and piecing back together of tissue. Probably not the best time to try and lose weight because you want to have enough calories to draw from so that you're not actively losing muscle mass. And losing weight, it's so easy to lose muscle mass. So after a big surgery where maybe you can't walk on your leg too well, losing more muscle mass is not recommended. And so it's probably smart to wait until your limb is a little bit rehabbed, to start that process. Doing exercises with the muscle, eating high enough protein levels, that should be enough to stop the bleeding if it were on muscle atrophy, losing a lot of muscle on that limb. And so that's one of the things that we definitely have to think about with people who have just gotten out of a surgery is they don't want to be in a calorie deficit because how are they supposed to repair all those processes that are going on in that injured limb?
Right. And I'm not a nutrition expert by any stretch, but I do know that there are pro-inflammatory foods out there that you do want to be mindful of, especially when you're recovering from a surgery, so that swelling does get under control and your pain state is managed better outside of just using medication. And movement is definitely a part of that too. Let's move on to sleep if we can. In looking at some of the research on sleep and listening to several podcasts and other experts on sleep, it's really come to my attention in the last few years that it is, as some people have said, it's a great elixir of health, because not only is sleep restoring all the functions of the immune system and the nervous system back to baseline, but all of the systems, I think, in your body have some kind of tie-in and are being regulated by good sleep. And so we know that ages 18 to 64 need somewhere between 7 and 9 hours of sleep per night, but we're just not getting anything near that. And I think culturally there is kind of this badge of honor to be able to not sleep a full night and just keep on working or being productive. But I think more and more the evidence is starting to build up that it's really just not good for longevity. And there are a lot of neurodegenerative diseases that might be coming out of having poor sleep habits. I will put a plug in for the physical therapy home health section. They put together a sleep toolkit, and we'll have show notes after this that will have a link to that toolkit that you can download, and has a lot of really great ideas on how to look at sleep hygiene, how to make certain decisions about your sleep habits, and what are some of the consequences that can rise out of that. What do you want to touch on next? We've got resistance training. Okay. All right. So if we're going to talk about resistance training, we all want to build muscle mass to a certain degree. We'll want to get stronger. Let's say we probably don't think about muscle mass, but we do have to understand that as we age, we are going to lose a certain amount of muscle mass. Things decline between 3 and 8% per decade. And things start to really accelerate after the age of 70. So if we think about trying to recover from orthopedic injuries, surgeries, and the like, getting stronger is certainly one of the things that we're trying to do. But time is also working against us at a certain point, because our ability to get stronger and to build more muscle is going in the opposite direction. So, and that also parallels with strength. So it's not just building muscle mass, but it's also getting stronger too. Endurance capacity can decline 10% per decade as well. And metabolism, as we're coming to understand, has 4 different stages of life. And so at age 60 and beyond, things start to decline, but between 20 and 60, there's kind of this steady hold of metabolism. There was a study that just came out recently in Science magazine that talks about this. But in all these aspects, whether it's metabolism, endurance capacity, or muscle mass and strength, there are still proactive things that we want to promote doing for a healthy lifespan. And some of those things don't have to be very complicated, but you do perhaps need a little bit of professional guidance in understanding, how do you strength train? Where do you start? How do you build? When is too much too much? So let's go ahead and talk about some of those aspects. How would you start somebody who has never, picked up a weight in their life, but they need to obviously build some kind of capacity? Where would you put them, on a machine, free weights, or what do you like to do?
I would probably use a blend of those things. I would probably use machines because that really gives you an idea of isolating a certain body part. How hard can you push with that body part, which is a super good feeling once you kind of get used to it. And then also body weight type of exercises like step ups and, squats and the like, just to, promote things that people do in real life, and also to help with like balance and proprioception and things like that. I think a blend of those things is great. Like you said, sometimes we need some guidance. But I also don't want that to stop people from sometimes just trying things and seeing if they can get used to them. Like if someone wanted to go start a resistance training regime and didn't know where to start, wanted to go to the gym, didn't want to get sold a package for personal training, I would say machines is a great place to start. They're a low barrier to entry. You kind of just sit on the thing, you set it, you get it adjusted to your body shape, and you just go. I think that's a great way to start.
I like what you said. I like what you said about the step ups and the squats. I think if we make it as accessible to the person at home, then they're probably more likely to develop that habit. So, and then when they get into the gym or into our environment in the clinic, then we put the machines in their way, in their path, and they start to build a little bit of more confidence. So I like what you're saying about making it very easy for them to start doing those things, and it relates to what they need to be doing at home anyways too. Um, when do you think they should be progressed, or how should they be progressed once you got them going on a certain weight or a certain movement pattern? How do you like to move them from one week to the next?
That's a very general question, Bob, but thank you for asking it. Progression is a lot about their tolerance of that exercise and that activity, because when they're first starting, everything's going to be super light because they're not used to that particular movement or that exercise or whatever. So we're definitely coming in underneath their strength level. We're not pushing things that are at the top of their strength level. We're definitely coming in at the bottom there. So as they kind of are able to tolerate exercise better, then we're able to move more into what is actually going to be challenging for them. So at the beginning, it's going to be challenging for them because exercise always is for a beginner. But as we start to move into a little bit heavier weight, or maybe a little bit more repetitions, or more sets, which all these are all ways to progress somebody, then we're actually going to be challenging their muscles and their strength and all of that good stuff. So I would say it's a blend of all of them. Maybe the exercises, or maybe the body weight exercises, we start adding weights to, the step ups, we give them some dumbbells, or the squats, you give them a dumbbell. And then the machines, maybe we're just increasing their number of repetitions there. Not everything has to be progressed in exactly the same manner for it to be effective.
Right, and that's a good point. It has to be individualized to the person in front of you. And there's this 10% rule that's floating around, and it basically talks about trying to increase dosage of exercise by at most 10% a week. But maybe 10% for one person may be too much, and you have to just dial it back. You have to have them listen to their body and see how their body responds to the exercise prescription that you're giving them. And then if everything is, satisfactory, and, they're not incurring more pain, or there's not more swelling, or, and they're feeling that they're able to recover within a couple of days, and then, you're probably hitting at the right level for stress adaptation, right? Because we're constantly trying to find a way to stress their body out in order to adapt and get stronger, or get more powerful. So let's see.
Really quick, can I say all those things that you talked about that happen through the lifestyle, say with reduction in muscle mass, or endurance capacity, things like that. I think the numbers that we kind of see as, 7% per decade or 10% per decade, things like that. I think that those numbers are if someone isn't active, right? Am I understanding that correctly?
Right. There's the studies that they do on those are for folks. They do large studies of people across the lifespan, men and women, and they're looking at basic. I mean, they can't control for everything. So some people are still exercising and some people are not. But I think physiologically, we can expect that even with strength training, maybe you don't decline at 7%, you'll decline at like 3% or 2%. But there is going to be some kind of a degradation across the decades. And that's fine, because, the things that we're interested in doing at 60 probably aren't the same things we're interested in doing at 20. We just have to be realistic about what we're trying to accomplish. But at the same time, there are masters athletes. There are folks who are competing for senior games. These athletes have to be treated, I think, with high levels of respect for what they are accomplishing, but with an understanding that their body is different at 70 than it is at 30. So it is a good point to realize that you can slow down this aging process, and these percentages aren't like marked in stone for everyone.
Yeah, slow it down significantly, because, sometimes we see two different people at, age 70. One has been active their whole life and one has been relatively inactive. They present so differently, so I think because of where we are in the health system, I think we see that so much, either someone who used to be active and now isn't, or someone who's just been pretty inactive throughout their whole lives. And it's at that point, there are things that we can do to get them stronger and, help them move better and have better endurance and strength and all that. But it's a much harder challenge than just getting fit when you're a little younger and continuing that going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. If we can develop these habits earlier in life, we're going to be in a much better place. There is a generation of folks that didn't grow up knowing about exercise or understanding what to do, and they are embarking on a more active lifestyle later on in their life. And I think that's great. I think for us for me as a clinician, it's inspiring too, because it lets me know how adaptable the human organism really is. You can completely not do anything for 60 years and then decide, I want to do that triathlon. And then you start training and you're doing it. It's really remarkable. Actually, it reminds me of a triathlete. She is a sister, so she's in the clergy, and she started training for triathlons around age 60. So she's now in her 80s and she competes. She's been doing like full Ironman triathlons and half Ironmans for a long time. And she's amazing. So there are examples out there to really get inspired by. What else do we want to talk about in terms of physical activity and getting started in an easy way?
Do you want to talk about what to do? So we talked about, people who've never resistance trained, but what about people who want to improve their, the WHO recommendations for 150 minutes of moderate or 75 for vigorous? Someone who's never thought about that, how would they start?
I like to recommend people start very simply with like a walking program. I think walking is, even for folks who are recovering from a lower body surgery, walking tends to be the common denominator of an activity that they can aspire to do relatively early on, and they can start to set benchmarks for their progress. So, starting out with a 10-minute walk and see if that's a comfortable walking tolerance. And then again, listening to your body and then progressing from there. Usually I, suggest people start on level terrain. I know around here we can have a lot of hills and maybe there isn't always a sidewalk that we can use. And folks do hike a lot around here, so they want to get back to hiking oftentimes. But I do think that starting with level terrain and a walking program is an easy way to go. And then once you get that habit down, then you can start to expand into other habits. I think easy things for if you don't have weights at home, I'm often asking people to try putting cans in a grocery bag and lifting that, or just filling jugs of water to different heights and playing with that. So I think there are ways at home to get started. And then, like you were saying before, you can either use a combination of the machines, which really kind of keep you on a single track. A lot of the work with using free weights is that you're trying to stabilize at the same time to try and move the weight. And that can be challenging in the very beginning. But once we know that the first 4 to 6 weeks of any strength training program, we're really just building that neuromuscular connection. So the nervous system is just getting primed to move, and that's where you're making your strength gains. You're not making like huge, you're not going to turn into, like, I shouldn't say Arnold Schwarzenegger in California, but you're not trying to do any sort of bodybuilding in those 4 to 6 weeks, but you're really greasing the groove and priming the system to understand how to move more smoothly when you're pushing some kind of resistance. And I think that early period of resistance training is important for getting that smoothness down, coordinating it with your breathing, and feeling good about it and feeling like you have come from point A to point B.
Great recommendations there.
It looks like we have maybe some questions that we can start to look at. All right. Do you want to take the first question?
I'll take the second question.
Okay. So we have a question here. Taking into consideration COVID-19, is it safe to play racquetball? So, I'm not going to be the COVID-19 expert here, but we do know at this point that when we're exerting ourselves, we're expelling more air and we're breathing harder, and there is a greater propensity for sharing whatever it is that you're expelling into the atmosphere. If it's an indoor court, that's probably, I'm going to guess, more of a risk in playing racquetball in these times. But I don't know that any gyms right now have. I mean, are there any indoor racquetball courts around here that are open? I have no idea.
Yeah, I think there are some that are open.
There
So
are.
it must be up to you to kind of gauge the risk, I guess.
Yeah, and I don't know right now the state of affairs with gyms. I think everything is in a state of flux a little bit with the Delta variant. So gyms might be changing their indoor policies. So it's hard to comment specifically on that. If it's an outdoor court, there is less risk. You are still exerting yourself. You're still expelling more air, but it's outdoors, so the air exchange is a lot different than an indoor court.
So we've got some questions here about exercises for osteoporosis and also osteoarthritis. So, osteoporosis is when your bones kind of lose a lot of their density and become easier to break. And exercises that are done to increase bone density are usually done with impact training. But with this condition, you probably don't want to do that, especially if it's already in the osteoporosis stage. Weight training tends to be relatively safe as long as it's progressed in a slow, gentle manner. So kind of the stuff we've been talking about, walking, working with weights, probably good to have a guide on some of that, just to make sure that you're not doing too much under the guide of either your doctor or someone who's a physical therapist for you. But weight bearing exercises are recommended. People tell me they love to swim. That's great. That's a form of cardio. Perfect. But you want to be weight bearing because that's going to increase the stress on the bones, and that's what they respond to. In terms of osteoarthritis, I actually have a really cool resource for you. It's called oaoptimism.com. We can also put that in the resources that we send out. It is a cool resource for people with arthritis who are struggling with limitations to kind of watch some videos about, what does having arthritis mean in regards to exercise and activity, and how can you move forward and get more active again, even with this condition. So, kind of same as we were talking about with everything else, start where you're at and work up as you are able to. But I highly recommend going to that website and kind of reading or watching some of those videos.
I will add on the osteoporosis question. There is some research to show that if you do promote more extension in the spine, if you're doing spinal exercises, and obviously everything relates to the spine, but if you're doing spinal extension instead of spinal flexion, meaning if you're doing more back bending rather than forward bending exercises, then you're actually decreasing your risk for any kind of vertebral fractures, which tend to be problematic in folks who are dealing with bone health issues. We have another question here. I work out 1 to 3 hours per day. I swim and bike every day and lift free weights every other day. I've lost a ton of weight, and at 68, I feel great. Does this seem extreme? No, actually, that sounds great. It sounds very, very much like you've already put into play a lot of good habits that are going to keep you moving throughout your life, and you've sounds like you've already seen the result of that. So congratulations on losing the weight. And even at 68, you're demonstrating the fact that if you stick to a program and you vary it up because you're doing different things, it looks like, then you're stimulating a lot of different systems in your body that are all responding in a very positive way. So that sounds great.
I want to add real quick on that one that the World Health Organization recommends to people who are already meeting those minimum recommendations, they can pretty much go ahead and double that. So 300 minutes, and I don't want this to get overwhelming for people who are not meeting the first one, but it's kind of like more is better when it comes to exercise promoting health. It's hard to do too much. Obviously, doing too much has a little bit more to do with your ability to recover from the exercises. So if you're meeting the other things that we talked about, sleep, you've got good nutrition going on, your stress is pretty controlled, you are probably recovering from those exercises fairly well. And so they're well tolerated.
We have another question here. Since 1.2 to 2.0 grams of protein is a big range, which one do we use? I think that depends on the type of athlete that you are. The more elite exercise, cardio exercise athletes are going to require probably around the 2.0 grams. And I think also if you're in the powerlifting style of resistance training and you're getting up into heavier weights, you're gonna require higher grams of protein on that range. The 1.2 probably anywhere between 1.0 and 1.2, I think supersedes the RDA recommended standard. So I think if you're shooting for that range, you're probably going to be pretty good as long as you're exercising. Do you have any other thoughts on that?
The recommendation for elite cardio athletes is 1.6 and above. And so as long as you have a lot of cardio requirements in your weekly exercise, if you're getting 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight, you're probably doing a-okay. Yeah, people who are doing more resistance training do tend to have a little bit more protein, but at that point, it's kind of like, how can you get enough? And is it taking over your entire calorie daily intake? So you obviously want to be able to get in some carbs and fat as well too. So it's kind of about balance at that point. 1.6 should do you pretty well if you're doing any kind of high level activity. But you want your diet to be somewhat balanced.
Okay, we have another question here about RSA, reverse shoulder arthroplasty or total shoulder arthroplasty. How long is physical therapy for each one and how many days a week? So that's more of a rehabilitation question, but it will vary for the individual. If you have a reverse shoulder arthroplasty, then you probably are in a situation where your shoulder, doesn't have the same integrity or it has gone through other surgeries before that where it doesn't have the same integrity to be able to create muscle mass, build strength around the shoulder in the same way as other surgeries. So it's probably more of an extreme situation. You're in this environment, you're going to be coming here for about 3 months for rehabilitation at minimum. But all of these joint replacement surgeries, really, they require commitment for a minimum of a year of rehabilitation. So I know it's a little bit off topic, but it's definitely a conversation to have with your surgeon and with your physical therapist, because it has to be individualized to you and your situation.
This next question is a guy saying he's 87. He shops and cooks everything for himself. He hates exercising. Does he get a break because he exercised when he was younger? If you have built up a lot of muscle mass when you were younger and you're still relatively active, you might be able to get away with it with having lower activity levels. But I mean, exercise is just so protective on so many things, pretty much all systems of your body, right? Cardio, pulmonary, vascular, musculoskeletal. There's just no system that it doesn't touch. I mean, endocrine, nervous system. And you kind of have to keep doing it to keep getting those benefits, unfortunately. Hating exercise could be more about what you're doing. If you're doing things that you hate, then try to find something that maybe doesn't feel so much like exercise, like going on a walk or a hike with a friend, or learning a new sport or an activity. I don't know that I have too many creative suggestions off the top of my head right now, but maybe it's the activity that you're doing, maybe what you were doing before or what you were doing recently that you hate. Maybe you can change the mode on that. Figure out something that you do like.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think the context in which we exercise really can work for us or against us. Some people like group exercise. Some people like to do it by themselves. Some people like to do it in a gym. Some people like to do it in nature. I think it really does have an impact on how we look at movement. I think exercise takes many forms, like Anya's saying. It doesn't just have to be lifting a weight. It can be walking up a hill. It can be, going on a hike, or riding a bike instead of driving to the store, or something that gets you moving in a way that you would otherwise probably not move. So do you get a break? That's an interesting question. If you have everything else dialed in just right, your nutrition, your sleep, your stress management, if everything is humming along really well, do you still need to exercise? Well, I'd say probably so if you want to keep moving. That's my bias. There's another question here. Is getting some protein from a drink mix okay?
Yes, with the caveat that it's not for every single meal. So you do want most of your protein sources coming from whole foods, but there's nothing wrong with using a shake, a powder, a bar to help get to those higher protein levels. That's totally fine.
I agree. And we're not nutrition experts by any stretch, but from the things that I've heard from nutrition experts, they do say that you can use these types of supplements, but like Anya's saying, don't rely on them solely. You really do want a wide variety of nutritional sources for all of those macronutrients. So have it in your shake, but don't have a shake every meal, I guess. Let's see. We have another question. I'm 70 years old. I bike 2 hours, 3 times a week. I walk every day. Also, is whey protein powder a good protein to take every day? 1 scoop, 30 grams of protein. Yeah, I'd say like Anya was saying before, it's something to complement your diet if you feel like if you're not able to get the protein in other forms.
As long as you're not lactose intolerant.
Right. Let's see.
someone in the chat box.
Okay.
We have a question about somebody who does a lot of exercising but has trouble walking up hills. Bone density issue, but they also do a lot of exercising, including with weights and in the gym. I'm not sure if that's suggestions for more types of exercise or if it's suggestions for how they can get better at walking up hills. It sounds like if you're doing a lot of exercise already with weights in the gym, that's going a long way to working on your bone density. I mean, one thing you could do if you're looking to get better at walking up hills is walk on the treadmill with a slight incline. You know, start with 1%, go to 2%, go to 3%, and kind of increase as you go. That way you kind of can control the level of incline that you're working on. Do you have anything to add?
I think developing some focus on posterior chain strength might be helpful too. So posterior chain would include all the muscles on the backside of your body. So that would mean the muscles of your spine or right next to your spine as they connect down to your glutes or your butt muscles and down into your hamstrings or the back of your thigh and into your calves and all the way down to the bottom of your foot. So I know a lot of times here in this environment, we tend to see folks who have gluteal amnesia. They're unable to really control this this ability to contract their glutes for exercises that require that type of hiking or pushing or stepping up motion. So if you haven't already, see if you can work either with a personal trainer or with a physical therapist or physical therapist assistant or somebody who's knowledgeable about developing a program for posterior chain strength. Because oftentimes, you know, we think like I need to climb that hill using my quads, my strong thigh muscles, but at the same time, it's a coordination between what you're doing with your thigh muscles and your glute muscles together. You know, it's all a part of what we call the kinetic chain. Hopefully that answers some of your questions.
We've got another question here about taking in protein before or after a workout. This would speak to protein timing. And as long as you're getting in protein in 3 large meals per day, you don't really have to worry about pre or post workout protein. It should be enough to be available for your body to create muscle protein synthesis as long as you're getting enough throughout the day. You know, they used to think, oh, 30-minute window, you have to take it immediately. But the research is kind of skewing that as long as you're getting enough throughout the day, you're good to go. If you like to, there's certainly no harm in doing it, but you don't have to.
And I think the last question here seems to be a little bit more rehab focused or medically focused. Why does my right arm go to sleep whenever I sneeze? So that can have a number of different reasons. Definitely one to talk to your doctor about. You know, it could be something that comes from the neck, or it could be something that is related to your shoulder specifically, or a combination of the two. So I'd go see your doctor and get a medical workup on that.
We have one more from the person who asked if walking up hills. Sit to stand does work the posterior chain, you know, but if you're performing that exercise as one of the posterior chain, which is essentially a squat, you've got to be going probably deep enough to work on the glute muscles, and you probably need to be doing it to an intensity where it's actually really challenging for you. So everything's a little bit, it depends in that situation. Yeah, as long as sit to stand is sufficiently challenging and you're going to a good enough depth, yes, it does work the posterior chain.
I already know the answer to this question, but Anya, what is your favorite posterior chain exercise? It starts with a D.
No, it's a hip thrust, Bob. I mean, we know I love deadlifts.
Yeah, well, this is true.
We all know this.
Can you tell us what a hip thrust is, though?
It's where you sit on the ground and you put your upper back on a box that's about 12 to 14 inches high. And then you push down into the ground with your feet and essentially do a glute bridge, and you lift your butt off the ground into the air. And generally you put load right on your hips. So you're thrusting the weight right into the air. And it is one of the most taxing exercises for the gluteus maximus.
And research will back her up on that one too. Can you explain what a deadlift is?
A deadlift is when you are grabbing something heavy from the ground or bending over and picking it up, and you bend over at the hips and you stand up straight and you pick it up and then you set it back down again. That's a deadlift.
Right. Is your back straight or is it rounded? Or does it matter?
That's a very nuanced question.
Yes.
When I am cueing someone, I would say try to keep your back pretty straight. Research has found that when we bend over, even with the straightest of backs, we're flexing a little bit. And so you don't need to militantly keep your back straight, but the general cue is, yes, keep your back relatively straight. And that is going to, work more of the posterior chain muscles, and your back muscles are kind of acting as a support there.
All right. And I think that's it for questions. Jason, would you like to wrap things up?
Yes. Thank you again, everybody, so much for joining tonight. Like I said, I will be getting this out to.
Well, I want to thank all of you for joining us. And thank you for listening to us ramble a little bit about some of the stuff that we just do on a daily basis. And we're probably, preaching to the choir a little bit on some of this stuff. But health is multifactorial, and it's been great to talk about some of these topics for a little while, and I want to thank Anya for being my co-host. She's pretty special.
It was really a pleasure to work with you on this one, Bob. So thanks for everyone who asked questions, watched us, participated, and we appreciate you being there.
And pamplemousse.